The first thing I noticed was the silence between the pine needles. In my village, even silence has a sound. It breathes. It hums softly through moss and bark, through the river stones, through the old boundary markers that keep our seasons steady and our paths from folding into places they should not reach. I have lived with that hum all my life, so when it faltered, I felt it in my teeth before I heard it with my ears. I was kneeling behind my cottage, hands deep in a bed of frost leaf, when the hum skipped like a harp string cut too tight. The leaves under my fingers stiffened. The air cooled, then warmed, then cooled again, as if the day could not decide what it wanted to be. I froze, listening, and the forest answered with a single, uneasy crow call. Strangers, not travelers passing on the distant road, not a lost forager or a curious child. This was the weight of someone stepping over lines meant to be respected. The boundary stones never lied, and neither did my bones. I wiped soil from my palms and stood, brushing my skirt smooth with a habit that had nothing to do with cleanliness and everything to do with control. I could already imagine Elder Valor lifting his eyebrows at me as if I had personally invited trouble to tea. He liked to believe our village was a bowl turned upside down, protected by tradition and the old wards. I knew better. Wards are not walls. They are agreements, and agreements can be tricked. I walked to the front path where the rowan tree leaned over my gate, like an aunt who disapproved of everyone I ever spoke to. I placed my fingers on the bark and felt the shallow tremor of the village enchantment. It was strained, like a singer holding a note too long. Down the lane, the village began to stir. Doors opened. Curtains shifted. A few faces appeared and vanished again. In Briar Hollow, curiosity always arrived before courage. I saw them at the same time everyone else did, but I sensed them before my eyes could decide what shape they were. The first stranger came from the east road where the sunlight turns honey gold in late afternoon. He walked as if the road belonged to him, not in arrogance, but in certainty. His cloak was deep green, stitched with thread that caught light in a way ordinary dye never could. His hair was pale, not white like age, but silver like moonlight laid across water. An elf, unmistakably, and not from our village. His presence slid into the air like a new melody. The hum of the boundary stones tightened around him, testing him. He stopped at the fountain in the village square and looked up, slowly, as if he were tasting the scent of our homes. When his gaze turned, it passed over baskets of apples, over the smithy, over Elder Valor himself, marching forward with the authority of a man who believed the world owed him explanations. Then the stranger looked at me, not past me, not through me, at me, as if he had been walking here for days, with only that moment in mind. My breath caught. I told myself it was annoyance, or the sharp edge of old caution. I told myself many things. The truth was simpler and more dangerous. I felt seen. Elder Valor spoke first, loud enough for the square to hear. He asked the questions our village always asks: name, purpose, length of stay. The stranger answered with a voice that was calm and unhurried. Arendor, that was what he called himself. The name carried a faint ring, like metal tapped gently. He said he was a wanderer. He said he followed stories, old songs, old places. He said he meant no harm. People in my village like neat words that fit in neat baskets. Wanderer, story, no harm. They nodded as if language itself were proof. I did not nod, because while the village listened to Arendor, another presence moved at the edge of the square like a shadow choosing where to settle. The second stranger was almost forgettable, which is precisely why I noticed him. He was not tall like Arendor. He did not carry a cloak that shimmered, or a name that rang. He looked like someone who belonged anywhere. Dark hair tied back simply, boots worn but clean, hands steady, eyes friendly. Human, I thought at first, though humans rarely traveled this deep without guides. He carried a small leather satchel and a rolled parchment case, like a messenger or a clerk. He smiled at a child who stared too openly. He offered a polite nod to the baker. He let his gaze drift without landing, the way people do when they want you to believe they have nothing to hide. Then his eyes met mine. For the briefest heartbeat, his friendliness slipped. What remained was not anger, not hunger, not anything so obvious. It was intention, cold and exact, like a blade kept behind velvet. I felt the boundary hum twitch again, but this time it did not tighten around him the way it did around Arendor. It hesitated, confused, as if it could not decide what he was. That frightened me more than any glittering cloak. Elder Valor turned to address the village, already shaping a speech about hospitality and the sacred customs of Briar Hollow. Someone murmured about the Harvest Glow Festival coming in 2 nights, and how travelers were good luck, how the lanterns would look brighter with new eyes watching. I watched Arendor as he stood near the fountain, patient, composed. too still for someone who claimed to be merely passing through. He listened, yes, but his attention kept folding back toward me like a river returning to a familiar bend, and I watched the second stranger as he drifted closer to the fountain from the side street, never rushing, never pushing, simply arriving where he wanted to be, as if the village itself made room. When Elder Valor finally noticed him, the man stepped forward smoothly and bowed, a gesture so practiced it looked almost sincere. He introduced himself as Merrick. The name was plain, the smile was plain, the satchel and parchment case were plain. Nothing about him should have pulled at the ward hum in my bones, yet it did, hard. Merrick said he had come from the lowland trading post with messages for our council. He spoke of a change in road tolls, of new markings along the border, of a need for updated records. He held out a sealed parchment with a crest I did not recognize. Elder Valor took it like a prize, already pleased to have something official in his hands. He glanced at the seal, puffed up slightly, and told Merrick the council would meet at dusk. Arendor watched that exchange with the calm interest of someone observing a small play. Then he spoke again, softly, as if only the air needed to hear him. He said he had also come for the council, not for records, for me. He did not say the words that plainly, but the meaning landed in my chest anyway. His eyes held mine, steady and unafraid, and something inside me, something old and stubborn, tightened as if it recognized a danger it had once survived. Because in stories, when an elf arrives in a village and looks at a woman the way Arendor looked at me, it is never simple. It is never only romance. It is vows and bargains and paths that do not lead back to who you used to be. And Merrick, with his polite smile and his ordinary hands, watched me too, not with longing, but with measurement, as if he were estimating the cost of something he intended to take. The Harvest Glow Festival requires a lantern for each household, and one lantern, made of woven willow and heart glass, is always carried to the oldest boundary stone at midnight. That lantern is lit by the village singer. That singer is me. I had never questioned why. I had never wanted to. I had simply done my duty, year after year, keeping the hum steady, keeping the paths from folding, keeping Briar Hollow safe. Now, with two strangers standing in my square, I suddenly understood the terrible simplicity of it. If someone wanted to reach what the boundary stones protected, they would not need to break the ward. They would only need to use the one person the ward already trusted, me. And as the village welcomed Arendor and Merrick with warm bread and cautious smiles, I stood very still behind my gate and wondered which danger would arrive first, the one who wanted my heart or the one who wanted my life. If you want me to continue this story, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next part, and leave a comment telling me who you trust more right now, Arendor or Merrick, and why. That evening, the village tried to pretend nothing had changed. The baker set out honey loaves as if guests were common. Children ran with reed whistles as if the air did not feel thinner. Elder Valor rang the council bell with the same proud rhythm he always used, like sound alone could keep order. I carried my lantern oil across the square and felt eyes follow me. Not the usual village eyes that knew my footsteps and my habits. These were new eyes, weighing and wanting. Arendor stood near the fountain again, as if water was a familiar companion. He watched the way the lantern flame bent when I passed, and the smallest smile touched his mouth, the kind that suggests he knows a secret you have not been told yet. Merrick leaned against the post outside the council hall, posture easy, expression polite. If you did not look closely, you might think he was bored, but I had grown up listening to the boundary hum. I could hear when something pretended. As I approached the hall, I felt it again, the ward's hesitation. It did not reject Merrick. It did not welcome him. It simply paused, uncertain, and that uncertainty crawled along my skin like cold dew. Inside, the council hall smelled of dried herbs and old wood. The elders took their places on the raised bench. Elder Valor in the center, of course, with his carved staff laid across his knees like a symbol he liked to admire. 2 seats were set before them for the strangers. The village had rules for visitors. Questions first, hospitality after. But Briar Hollow also had another rule, unspoken and stronger. We do not refuse a story. And both strangers arrived with stories in their pockets. Arendor spoke first. He did not push his way forward. He waited until Elder Valor gave him permission with a gesture that looked generous but felt possessive. Then Arendor inclined his head and said he had come seeking the heart-glass lantern. The hall went quiet, as if someone had laid a hand over the village's mouth. Heart-glass. The word itself is a thread pulled from an old tapestry. We do not say it often. We do not need to. Every child knows the lantern carried at midnight is not ordinary. It is woven willow around a shard of pale crystal that catches not just light, but intent. It is why the boundary stones listen when I sing. It is why the forest paths stay loyal. Elder Valor's fingers tightened around his staff. He demanded to know why a wanderer would seek a village relic. Arendor's gaze drifted, briefly, toward me. Not a long look, not dramatic, just a soft shift, like a compass needle finding north, because it is tied to her, he said. Not those words exactly. He spoke in a careful way, as if he were stepping around traps. He said the heart glass was part of an older set, that it once belonged to a line of ward singers who could anchor thresholds with voice alone, that those singers were rare now, scattered, forgotten. He said he had followed the echo of such a voice, mine. I felt every elder look at me, some with surprise, some with suspicion, some with the dull disappointment of people realizing a familiar thing might have hidden value beyond the village. My throat went dry. I stared at the worn boards beneath my boots and forced myself to breathe. Elder Valor asked the question that mattered. What do you want from her? Arendor did not flinch. He did not deny. He did not disguise his answer behind politeness. He said he wanted a bond. The hall shifted as if wind had moved through it. A few gasps, a few scoffs. Someone muttered that outsiders always come with bargains. Bond is an old word among my people. It can mean many things. An oath, a joining of paths, a binding of magic. Sometimes love, yes, but love is not the dangerous part. The dangerous part is permanence. Elder Valor began to speak about consent and custom and village law, but Merrick cleared his throat softly, like someone reminding a room that he exists. He rose with the sealed parchment still in his hands, and his smile returned, smooth and reassuring. He said he had no interest in relics or songs. He said he was simply a courier, sent by the lowland post. He offered the parchment to the elders and said the message concerned border compliance and new inspections. Inspections, he said. That word did not belong in Briar Hollow. We are not a place people inspect. We are a place people forget. Elder Valor snapped the seal with the enthusiasm of a man who enjoys official paper. He scanned the lines, eyebrows lifting higher and higher, then hardening. He read aloud that a new magistrate had been appointed in the lowlands, tasked with ensuring the forest remained safe for trade, that villages along the old roads would be visited, that certain artifacts of uncertain origin might be subject to review. Review, another word that tasted wrong. Merrick's eyes flicked to me again, quick as a needle. Not longing, not admiration, confirmation. A warmth spread behind my ribs, not pleasant, not like embarrassment. It was the heat of realization. He did not come for records. He came to find what the records would point to, the heart glass lantern, or the one who carries it. Arendor spoke again, calm as ever. He said no magistrate had authority over ancient wards. He said the lowlands feared what they could not control. He said their inspections would weaken the boundary if handled without care. Merrick's smile did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened. He said the lowlands did not fear the forest. The lowlands feared disruption. He said everyone benefits from order. Order. That was his word. He wore it like a cloak. Elder Valor argued. The other elders murmured. The hall filled with voices trying to build walls out of language. I barely heard them, because the boundary hum, faint as it was, started to pulse, not around the hall, around me. I felt it tighten, like the village enchantment was drawing inward, seeking anchor. My skin prickled, my hearing sharpened, until I could hear the lanterns outside crackle in the wind. Arendor's gaze settled on me fully now, and in it was something I had not expected. Concern, not for the lantern, not for the ward, for me. Merrick watched too, face attentive, polite, as if he were learning my shape so he could find me later in a crowd. Elder Valor finally noticed my stillness. He asked what was wrong. I opened my mouth to answer, but no sound came, because in the silence between my breaths, I heard something else. A whisper that did not belong to any person in the hall. A thread of voice sliding beneath the words, too soft for human ears, but not for mine. Midnight, it said. And then, like a nail catching on cloth, the village ward hiccuped again. Arendor's hand moved, not reaching for me, but lifting slightly as if he wanted to steady the air itself. Merrick's fingers tightened around the parchment case. Elder Valor, eager to regain control, declared that the Harvest Glow Festival would proceed as planned. The lantern would be carried, the song would be sung, the boundary would be honored. Then he looked directly at me and reminded everyone that as ward singer, I would do my duty. The elders dismissed the meeting. Villagers spilled out into the dusk, voices buzzing with fear dressed up as excitement. I stepped outside into cold air and felt both strangers fall into step behind me at a distance that was not accidental. In the square, lanterns were being hung from branches. Someone laughed too loudly. Someone else crossed themselves with an old gesture, as if to ward off bad luck. I walked toward my cottage, spine straight, heart beating hard. Arendor called my name softly. Lyriel, he said. No one in Briar Hollow had used my full name aloud in years. Most called me Singer, or simply Lyra. Hearing it from his mouth was like hearing a song I had forgotten I knew. I did not turn. I kept walking. Marek's voice came next, friendly, careful, as if he were speaking to a skittish animal. "You must feel a lot of responsibility," he said. "All these people relying on you." I stopped at my gate and finally faced them both. Arendor stood in the fading light like something carved from moon and moss, eyes steady, expression open. Marek stood like a man who could blend into any crowd, smile gentle, gaze sharp beneath it. I realized then that they were not simply two strangers in my village. They were two paths laid in front of me, one that wanted my heart enough to bind it, and one that wanted my life enough to control it. And midnight was coming. The next day, Briar Hollow dressed itself in light. That is what we always do when fear arrives. We hang lanterns, we bake sweeter bread, we sing louder, we pretend brightness is a shield, and sometimes, when the world is kind, it works. I spent the morning weaving fresh willow strips for the lantern cradle, fingers moving from memory, while my mind chased the whisper I had heard in the council hall. Midnight. It had not sounded like Arendor or Marek. It had not sounded like any elder, any villager, any spirit I knew by name. It had sounded like the boundary itself trying to warn me. By midday, children were tying ribbons to fence posts, and the square smelled of pine resin and spiced cider. Elder Valor passed my gate twice, checking that I was preparing properly, as if he feared I might run away with the village's most precious duty. I considered it. Not running away entirely, just taking the heart-glass lantern and hiding in the deep grove until dawn. But hiding would not solve what was coming. It would only delay it, and delay is a luxury you pay for later. I needed answers, and in Briar Hollow, answers live in 3 places: the council, the forest, and the old singer's records. The council was a knot of pride. The forest was a maze of listening shadows, so I chose the records. Behind my cottage, beneath a loose floorboard I had never shown anyone, I kept a slim bundle of vellum pages wrapped in oilcloth. They were old, older than the cottage, passed down through singers who understood that some truths should not sit on open shelves for curious hands. I laid the pages on my table and smoothed them gently. My grandmother's script curled across the vellum like vines. "Do not bond without knowing the cost," one line warned. Another spoke of the heart-glass lantern as a key and a mirror. It anchors the boundary because it reflects the singer's intent back into the ward. If the singer is steady, the boundary is steady. If the singer is divided, the boundary fractures. I read that line twice, then a third time, until it felt like it had written itself behind my eyes. Divided. I thought of Arendor's calm insistence on a bond. I thought of Marek's polite reminders of responsibility, one pulling toward attachment, the other toward pressure. 2 forces, opposite in tone, and yet both pointed at the same weak point, me. A knock sounded at my door, soft, respectful. I slid the vellum back into its oilcloth, tucked it under the floorboard, and stood as if I had been doing something ordinary. When I opened the door, Arendor waited on my step with hands visible and empty. He did not smile like a man trying to charm. He looked tired, as if he had been listening to something heavy all night. "May I speak with you alone?" he asked. Behind him, at the edge of my path, Marek stood near the rowan tree, as if he had simply happened to be there. He lifted a hand in a small greeting, friendly, harmless, always positioned. Arendor noticed him too. His gaze did not harden, but the air around him seemed to sharpen, as if the forest itself recognized a predator scent. "Not here," Arendor added quietly. "Not where he can listen." My pulse quickened. I stepped onto the path and closed my door behind me. "Where then?" I asked. Arendor turned toward the narrow trail that led to the Singing Stones, a circle of flat rocks tucked between ferns and silver birch. It was a place where voices carried strangely, where secrets could be spoken and heard by the right ears. I followed him, careful not to look back, though I felt Marek's gaze on my shoulders like a hand. As we walked, Arendor kept a respectful distance. He did not touch me. He did not try to guide my elbow or shorten my steps. That restraint surprised me more than any grand promise would have. At the Singing Stones, the air felt clearer, as if the boundary hum had room to stretch. Arendor stopped beside the central rock and let out a slow breath. "Marek is not what he claims," Arendor said. I crossed my arms, more for steadiness than defiance. "I already knew that," I told him. Arendor's eyes softened. "Then you are wiser than your elders," he explained. Without dramatics. The lowlands, he said, had learned to shape paper into authority. Seals, crests, appointments. They used law like a net, but sometimes, when law failed, they used something else. Borrowed faces, borrowed names. Those who can slip through wards not by breaking them, but by confusing them. I remembered the ward's hesitation around Marek. I swallowed. "What is he?" I asked. Arendor hesitated, as if choosing words with care. "Not a monster from children's tales," he said. Not a demon. Something older and more practical. A weaver of roles. A man who has learned how to become whatever a place expects to see. A counterfeit presence, I murmured. Yes, Arendor said. And he is here because tonight you will carry the heart-glass lantern to the oldest boundary stone. My stomach clenched. I already understood the next part, but I needed to hear it. He will try to take it, I said. Arendor nodded. Or he will try to take you while you carry it, because the lantern is not the only key. I stared at the central stone, at the faint grooves worn into it by centuries of hands. My voice felt small when I spoke again. Why are you here, Arendor? Truly. For the first time, his composure wavered, not with fear, but with something like vulnerability. Because I have been following the echo of your song for a long time, he said, and because the heart glass belongs to a set, and the set is waking. I did not like the sound of waking. He watched my face carefully, then added, softer. Almost everything in the old world is tied to a singer. When the thresholds shift, it is singers who feel it first. I thought of the whisper, midnight. So what do you want from me? I asked. The directness made his mouth tighten, but he did not dodge. I want to bind my ward to yours for one night, he said. Not forever. Not yet. A temporary joining, so your voice does not stand alone at the boundary stone. My breath caught. A one-night bond, still dangerous, still intimate in its own way. Not physical, not the kind of bond humans gossip about, but magical alignment. 2 songs braided into one. If I refused, he went on, Merrick will have a better chance to divide your focus. And if your focus divides, the boundary will too. I looked down at my hands. They were steady, but inside, I felt a tremor. Why me? I whispered, and hated that it sounded like pleading. Arendor's gaze held mine with a kind of honesty that made my throat ache. Because when you sing, the forest listens like it is being remembered, he said. And because I think your heart is stronger than you believe. The words should have warmed me. Instead, they frightened me, because they felt true. A twig snapped behind us. Arendor's head turned instantly, eyes narrowing, senses sharpening. From between the trees, Merrick stepped into view, hands raised as if he had stumbled upon us by accident. His smile was easy, almost apologetic. I hope I am not interrupting, he said. The village is looking for you, Lyrel. Elder Valor wants to rehearse the midnight song. He used my full name too. I felt my blood go cold. Arendor's voice was calm, but the air around him tightened, like a drawn bow. She will come when she is ready, he said. Merrick's smile stayed in place. His eyes flicked just once to Arendor, as if measuring him like a problem. Of course, Merrick said. I only worry. Responsibility can be heavy, and tonight, so much depends on her. Then he looked at me. You do not want to disappoint them, do you? It was not a threat, not overtly. It was a hook. I suddenly understood how he would try to divide me, not with force, not with violence, with guilt, with pressure, with the fear of being the reason everything falls apart. The boundary hum pulsed faintly in my ears, as if urging me to choose quickly. Arendor waited. He did not demand. He did not command. Merrick waited too. And somewhere beneath the leaves, the whisper returned, so soft only my bones could hear it. Midnight. I drew in a slow breath, tasting pine and coming storm, and realized the festival was not just a celebration. It was a trap being set in lantern light. By dusk, the village square glowed like a basket of fireflies. Lanterns swung from branches and eaves, their light pooling on cobblestones, gilding faces into warmth. Music drifted from the inn, and laughter rose in practiced waves, as if everyone had agreed to drown out the dread with noise. Elder Valor called me to the council hall for rehearsal, and I went because refusing would have fed Merrick exactly what he wanted. I wore my simplest cloak and braided my hair tightly, not for beauty, but for discipline. If my hands were busy, my mind could not unravel as easily. Inside the hall, the elders sat in a row like carved statues. Villagers crowded behind them, eager to witness a ritual they had seen 100 times, but suddenly feared might be their last. The heart-glass lantern rested on the central table, unlit. In the dimness, its crystal core looked like a pale tear suspended in woven willow. I felt it before I touched it, that familiar pull, like a note waiting inside my chest. Elder Valor began with instructions, repeating what he always repeated. Stand straight. Do not pause. Keep the rhythm steady. Sing the old cadence, not the shortened one the children hum. I nodded, expression calm, while my thoughts ran ahead to midnight and the oldest boundary stone, and the whisper under the leaves. Marek stood near the back, close enough to see but not close enough to seem eager. His posture said respect. His eyes said patience. He held the parchment case under one arm, still playing the role of courier, still pretending paper mattered more than what sat on the table. Arendor was not inside the hall. That absence tightened my nerves more than his presence would have. If he stayed away, perhaps he feared drawing attention. Or perhaps he was preparing. Or perhaps the most dangerous possibility. He had decided a bond was not worth the risk. I reached for the lantern. The willow was cool against my palms, and the crystal pulse inside it answered my touch with a faint shimmer. As I lifted it, the boundary hum in the hall deepened, not louder, but fuller, like the village itself drew a breath. Elder Valor gestured. "Begin." I closed my eyes. The first. Notes were always simple, a low tone that matches the forest floor, a sound the roots recognize. Then the melody rises, curling like smoke, wrapping around the intention of protection and home and threshold. I had sung it since I was young enough to stand without swaying, and yet tonight, the song felt heavier, as if the air clung to each syllable. Halfway through the first phrase, the heart glass flickered. My eyes snapped open. The lanterns. Crystal should not flicker during rehearsal. It responds at midnight, at the oldest stone, under the open sky. Here, in the hall, it should remain dormant. A murmur ran through the villagers. Elder Valor frowned as if I had personally offended the laws of nature. I tried again, steadier, pressing my focus into the melody. The heart glass flickered again, brighter this time, and for a heartbeat I saw something in its pale depths. A path, not the village path, not the forest trail. A thin, shimmering line like a crack in air, leading away from the hall, away from the square, toward the oldest boundary stone. My stomach tightened. The lantern was not waiting for midnight. It was warning me. I lowered my voice, letting the note soften into silence. Elder Valor rose. "What are you doing?" he demanded. I kept my expression neutral. "The lantern is restless," I said. "The boundary is strained. I need quiet." A few elders exchanged glances. Quiet was never something Elder Valor liked to grant, especially not when the village watched. He opened his mouth to argue. Merrick spoke first, tone gentle, helpful. "Perhaps she is overwhelmed," he suggested. "It is a great responsibility. Maybe we should give her a moment." His concern was like honey spread over a hook. Elder Valor seized on the suggestion. He declared the rehearsal complete, as if he had planned it that way. He told everyone to return to festival preparations and to trust the ward singer as they always had. Trust. The word rang hollow. As the hall emptied, I carried the lantern back toward my cottage, keeping my steps measured. Merrick followed at a distance that felt coincidental, but was not. I did not turn to look. I let him think I did not notice. At my gate, I paused. The lantern's crystal gave one more faint pulse, like a heartbeat. Behind me, Merrick spoke softly. "You do it beautifully, Lyriel," he said. "The village is lucky." I faced him slowly. His smile was pleasant. His eyes were watchful. "I am not doing it for luck," I replied. He chuckled, as if I had made a charming joke. "Of course not. You are doing it because you care, because you do not want anything to happen to them." Again, the hook. Again, the pressure. I lifted my chin. "Why are you really here, Merrick?" For a fraction of a breath, his smile faltered. Then it returned, smoother. "I told you. Messages, records, cooperation." He leaned slightly closer, voice lowering, as if sharing a secret. "But if you want my honest answer, I am here because the world is changing. The lowlands are expanding. Roads are reopening. People are moving into places that were once myths." His gaze slid to the lantern in my hands. "And myths are valuable." I felt cold spread through my veins. Valuable. Not sacred. Not protected. Valuable. A soft sound came from the lane. Arendor emerged from the shadows between lantern light and forest dusk. He walked without haste, but the air around him felt suddenly more grounded, as if his presence made the boundary hum remember its shape. Merrick's eyes narrowed, barely noticeable. Arendor stopped at a respectful distance, gaze on me, not on Merrick. "It is time to decide," he said, quietly. Merrick smiled again, but it did not reach his eyes. "Decide what?" Arendor did not answer him. He looked at me as if there were no one else in the world. "If you will accept it," he said, "we bind for one night. Your song will not stand alone." I swallowed. The lantern felt heavier, as if it knew what I was considering. Merrick's voice was warm, coaxing. "Be careful, Lyriel. Outsiders make promises. Your village is your duty. You do not need him." There it was, not concern, possession, a subtle claim that my duty belonged to Merrick's version of order. Arendor waited. I stared at the heart glass, at the pale crystal that had shown me a path. I remembered my grandmother's warning, "Do not bond without knowing the cost." But I also remembered the other line. If the singer is divided, the boundary fractures. Merrick wanted division. Arendor wanted joining. Neither was safe. but one was honest about the danger. I drew a slow breath and nodded once. Arendor stepped forward, careful, hands still visible and empty. He did not touch me. He simply lifted his palm near the lantern, not to claim it, but to align with it. He began to hum, a low note that matched the first tone of my song. The sound slid beneath my ribs like a second heartbeat. The heart glass brightened instantly, not flickering now, but steady, pale light filling the woven willow. The boundary hum around us tightened, then relaxed, as if recognizing a familiar chord. Merrick's smile stiffened. "What are you doing?" he asked lightly, but I heard the edge beneath. Arendor's voice remained calm, preventing harm. I felt the bond form, not like chains, not like a trap, but like two hands bracing the same door from opposite sides. My senses sharpened. The lantern's light seemed to carry faint threads, invisible lines stretching toward the forest. I could feel the oldest boundary stone. I could feel midnight approaching like a tide. And beneath the music and laughter of the festival, beneath the lantern glow, I could feel Marek's intention shift. He would not try to take the heart glass here. He would wait until the moment my voice mattered most. He would wait until the path the lantern showed became real under my feet. I turned toward my cottage, lantern still glowing, faintly, and spoke without looking at either of them. "At midnight, I go to the oldest stone," I said. "If you follow my rules." Arendor's voice was soft. "Agreed." Marek chuckled, as if amused. "Of course, I would never interfere." But when he turned away, his shadow moved strangely, just for a heartbeat, as if it did not match the lantern light. I watched it until it blended back into normal darkness. Then I closed my door, pressed my forehead to the wood, and listened to the bond hum inside my chest. It was steady. For now, midnight does not arrive in Briar Hollow like it does in other places. Here it feels like a hand lowering over a candle flame. The music from the square thins. Laughter fades into polite murmurs. Doors close softly, not because people are tired, but because the forest listens better when humans stop talking. I stepped out of my cottage with the heart glass, lantern cradled in both arms. Its pale core glowed steadily, and the bond hum inside my chest answered it like a second pulse. I could still hear Arendor's quiet note threaded beneath my own breathing, not spoken aloud, but present, aligned, steady. The lane was empty. That should have reassured me. Instead, it felt like stage silence before a performance goes wrong. At the edge of the square, the oldest boundary stone waited beyond the last row of lanterns, hidden where the village lights stopped pretending they reached the forest. The path to it was narrow and familiar. I had walked at every Harvest Glow festival since I was young. Tonight, the path looked the same, and that was the first lie. I sensed Marek before I saw him. He stood near the council hall steps, half in shadow, half in lantern light, as if he had positioned himself precisely between authority and celebration. A small group of elders hovered beside him, including Elder Valor, whose expression was tight with importance. My stomach clenched. Elder Valor raised his staff as I approached. "Lyra," he began, but Marek stepped forward with the sealed parchment in his hand, and the elder's voice faltered like a man reminded he is not the only one with power. Marek smiled at me, gentle and concerned. "Forgive this interruption," he said. "The council has discussed something essential." The elders watched me as if I were a hinge their whole village depended on. Elder Valor cleared his throat and tried to reclaim the moment. "The lowlands require a witness," he said stiffly. "The message states that a representative should observe the boundary ritual to confirm compliance." Compliance. The word again. My fingers tightened around the lantern. The heart glass light seemed to sharpen, and the bond hum in my chest deepened, a warning vibration. I looked at the parchment seal. In the lantern glow, it was convincing. A crest stamped cleanly, wax pressed just so, the kind of authority people trust because it looks like what they already fear. Marek's eyes met mine with practiced sympathy. "It is only paperwork," he said. "It will protect your village from trouble later. You would not want Briar Hollow to suffer because of a misunderstanding." There it was, the hook wrapped in care. Elder Valor added quickly, trying to sound reasonable. "We will accompany you," he said. "The council will walk with you to the oldest stone. It will show unity." Unity, I thought, while Marek stood behind them like a hand guiding their shoulders. I glanced toward the darker end of the square where the forest began. Arendor stepped into view as if the night itself had made space for him. His cloak blended with pine shadow. His silver hair caught a strip of lantern light and reflected it like a warning star. Elder Valor's eyes narrowed. "You are not invited," he snapped. Arendor did not look at him. His gaze went to the lantern, then to me. "He is steering them," Arendor said softly, and the calm certainty in his voice made my skin prickle. Marek's smile remained. "I am ensuring transparency," he replied. "Surely you value that." Arendor's attention did not shift. If you take a singer to the boundary with a crowd, you do not get transparency, he said. You get interference. Merrick tilted his head. Interference is an interesting accusation from someone who insisted on binding to her without council approval, the elders murmured, uneasy. Elder Valor looked scandalized, as if the word bond itself were a stain. I felt heat rise in my face, not shame, but anger. Marek had said it loudly on purpose, turning the bond into a social weapon. I drew a slow breath and let the bond hum steady me. Arendor's presence behind my ribs did not push. It anchored. That difference mattered. I raised my voice, calm enough to cut through the murmurs. The ritual requires quiet, I said. I will not sing with a crowd at my back. The ward listens to intention, not paperwork. Elder Valor opened his mouth, but I continued before he could. If the lowlands want a witness, they can witness from the edge of the lantern line. No one steps beyond the last village light except me. Silence fell. Even Merrick's smile paused, just slightly, as if he had not expected me to claim authority. Elder Valor sputtered, "That is not how it is done. It is how it will be done tonight," I replied. I turned to Marek. "If your message is genuine, the lowlands will accept a witness at the edge. If it is not genuine, you have no authority here." The words were simple, but they landed like a stone dropped into water. Marek's eyes narrowed for the briefest moment, then softened again. "Of course," he said lightly. "I only want what is best for everyone." He stepped back, letting the elders shuffle and whisper. Elder Valor looked torn between pride and fear of lowland consequences. At last, he gave a stiff nod, pretending it had been his idea. "Very well," he said. "We will observe from the lantern line." Merrick's smile returned, but something behind it hardened, like a door quietly locking. I felt it in the bond hum, a subtle shift in the air, as if someone had moved a piece on a board while everyone watched the wrong corner. I started down the path alone, lantern held close, heart steady, steps measured. Behind me, the elders gathered at the edge of the last lanterns, silhouettes in warm light. Merrick stood among them, hands folded politely, as if he had lost nothing, and Arendor followed me into the darkness beyond the lantern line, not beside me, not ahead, but a few paces behind, as if he were guarding my back without claiming my path. The forest swallowed the village glow quickly. The path became silver-black under starlight. The boundary hum grew louder here, not loud like sound, but loud like meaning. The heart-glass lantern brightened, and thin, pale threads of light reached forward like strands of spider silk, guiding me toward the oldest stone. My breath fogged in the cold. Halfway there, the lantern light trembled. I stopped. Arendor halted behind me, silent, attentive. In the heart glass, I saw the same shimmering line again, but now it was not only a path, it was a seam, a faint opening in the air itself, as if the boundary had been stitched, and someone had begun to pick at the thread. A whisper slid through the trees, too soft for ears, but clear in my bones. "Not midnight this time. 2 notes, it said. I swallowed hard. 2 notes meant harmony, or it meant a split. Arendor's voice came low behind me. "Do you feel it?" "Yes," I breathed. He stepped closer, still not touching. "Someone prepared the boundary before we arrived," he said, quietly, cleverly. My stomach dropped. Merrick. The oldest boundary stone appeared ahead, a dark shape against darker trees. The moss on it glimmered, faintly in the lantern light, as if it held dew that was not dew. As I approached, I saw something that did not belong. A new mark etched into the stone's lower edge, shallow but deliberate, like a symbol pressed with patient fingers. Not a crack, a sign. My pulse thudded in my throat. I knelt, bringing the heart glass close, and the lantern flared brighter, as if reacting with alarm. Arendor inhaled sharply. "That is a lure," he said. I stared at the mark, and dread rose like cold water, because the mark was shaped like a simplified crest, the same kind that sat on Marek's wax seal. He had been here, before me, before midnight. I looked up into the trees and realized the most frightening thing was not that he had tried to take the lantern. It was that he was trying to make my own song open the seam for him. The bond hum in my chest tightened, steady but strained. 2 notes, the whisper, repeated, closer now, as if the boundary itself waited for my choice. I lifted the lantern, eyes fixed on the stone, and behind me, in the deep dark beyond the last lantern line, I heard a soft step that did not sound like Arendor's. I did not turn immediately. If you grow up in a warded village, you learn an important truth early. The forest rewards panic. It echoes it, multiplies it, uses it to make you stumble into mistakes you will regret. So, I stayed kneeling by the oldest boundary stone, lantern lifted, breath steady, eyes on the mark Merrick had carved. The heart glass glow washed the moss in pale light and made the shallow symbol look almost innocent. Almost. Behind me, another step, careful and soft, as if whoever approached wanted my body to recognize them as harmless. Arendor shifted slightly to my left, the smallest movement, and the bond hum tightened like a hand bracing a door. "Do not look away from the stone," he murmured. I did not. Instead, I spoke into the air, voice calm, words chosen like stones in a path. If you are here, show yourself, I said. Silence. Then Merrick's voice came from the darkness, warm and reasonable as ever. Lyrael, he said. I was worried. You walked out here alone. That is dangerous. His tone carried the same gentle pressure, the same careful shaping, concern that was not concern, a net made of kindness. He stepped into the lantern's edge light, hands visible, posture relaxed. The satchel hung at his side. The parchment case remained under his arm. He looked exactly as he had in the square, ordinary, familiar, but his shadow did not fall where it should. It leaned toward the boundary stone, as if the light obeyed him. Arendor's voice stayed low. He brought more than paper. Merrick smiled at Arendor as if they were two men meeting at a polite gathering. You are not part of this, he said. Arendor did not answer. Merrick turned his attention back to me and softened his expression. You see that mark? He said gently. I know it startled you. It is only a guide. My stomach clenched. A guide. He took one careful step closer. You are gifted, Lyrael. You understand the boundary in a way your elders do not. The lowlands could honor that. Support you, give you resources, a wider stage for your song, a wider stage, another hook. I kept my gaze on the stone. Why carve a lowland crest on our oldest ward anchor? I asked. Merrick's pause was brief, practiced. Because symbols matter, he said. People trust what they recognize. If the lowlands are to leave your village alone, they need reassurance, a sign that you cooperate. My fingers tightened around the lantern cradle. Cooperate. He said it as if it were simple. The heart glass brightened. Suddenly, and in its pale depths I saw the seam again, thin as a hairline crack in air, trembling like a thread under tension. 2 notes, the whisper breathed. Merrick must have felt it too, because his smile sharpened with a quiet satisfaction. You feel it, don't you? He said softly. The boundary is ready. It only needs your voice. Arendor's breath sounded controlled, like restraint. Do not sing, he said. Merrick lifted a hand, palm up, as if offering peace. No one has to be harmed, he said. There is no need for conflict. Simply sing the ritual as you always do, and let the boundary open a little. A small seam, a small passage, enough for me to bring proof back to the lowlands. Proof, I thought, or access. I rose slowly, lantern held between us like a third presence. You cannot pass the boundary, I said. Merrick chuckled. The boundary is not a wall, it is a door. Doors open for the right key. He let his gaze fall to the lantern, then back to me. You are the key. The words landed with ugly clarity. I did not flinch. I had known it, but hearing him say it so plainly stripped away the last illusion of civility. My voice stayed calm. You do not want me to open it for proof, I said. You want me to open it so you can claim what is behind it. Merrick's smile faded just enough to reveal something colder. Claim is such a harsh word, he said. I prefer restore. The world is reconnecting, Lyrael. Old borders are inconvenient. Old myths create scarcity. People want access. They want certainty. He gestured toward the trees, as if the forest itself were an unreasonable neighbor. They want this. Arendor's voice came quiet and sharp. And you want control. Merrick's eyes slid to him. Control creates safety. I felt the bond hum in my chest steady me again, and suddenly I understood the "a" whisper. 2 notes did not mean split. 2 notes meant choice of harmony. If I sang alone, Merrick's carved symbol would shape the opening, guiding the seam where he wanted it. But if I sang with Arendor aligned, the boundary would hear a different intention. It would recognize an older pattern, older than lowland seals. It would refuse the lure. My grandmother's vellum line returned to my mind. The heart glass reflects the singer's intent back into the ward. So I made my intent simple. Not fear, not guilt, not proving anything. Protection, truth, home. I looked at Arendor. Not a question, a decision. Now, I said softly. Arendor's note rose beneath my breath, low and steady. The same grounding tone that begins my ritual, but deeper, braided with something old and wild like moonlit water. I lifted my voice and began to sing. Not the festival cadence, not the one Elder Valor demanded. I sang, the oldest version, the one my grandmother had taught me in whispers when she thought the council had grown too proud. A melody that does not flatter villages, a melody that does not negotiate with outsiders, a melody that remembers what thresholds are for. The heart glass lantern flared, bathing the boundary stone in pale light. Merrick's eyes widened for the first time. No, he said, the word slipping out sharper than he intended. Not that one. Composure snapped back immediately, but the brief crack had shown me everything. He had studied my song. He had expected me to sing the version that matched the lure he carved. He had not expected me to choose something older. The seam in the air shivered, widened a breath, then tightened like a wound closing. The symbol on the stone began to dull, its edges blurring as if the moss itself rejected it. Merrick stepped forward, voice urgent now. Lyrael, stop. "You do not understand what you are doing." I kept singing. Arendor's note stayed under mine, not overpowering, not taking control, simply holding my melody steady like a hand at my back. The bond hum in my chest became a clear chord, and the boundary hum around us answered, fuller, stronger, as if the forest had been waiting for this exact harmony. The whisper shifted, no longer warning, but guiding. Anchor, it breathed. I lowered the lantern toward the carved mark and held my voice steady, letting the heart glass pour light into the stone. The symbol began to fade. Marek's smile was gone now. His polite mask slid away, and what remained was the intention I had seen for a heartbeat in his eyes on the first day. Cold, exact. He opened his parchment case with quick hands and drew out a thin strip of something that was not paper, not wood. It shimmered faintly, like a sliver of mirrored skin. "A counterfeit ward thread," Arendor said under his breath. Marek held it up as if it were a key. "If you will not open the door willingly," he said, "I will teach the door to recognize me." He stepped toward the stone, raising the shimmering strip. I did not stop singing. I changed one note, a single shift in the melody, taught only to ward singers, a turn that tells the boundary this is not a celebration, but a sealing. Thapa. Heartglass light snapped brighter. The air around Marek rippled, like heat above a candle, and for a brief moment, his ordinary shape blurred, not into something monstrous, not into anything that would fit a frightening story, but into a wrongness, like a face reflected in water that moves when it should not. His shadow stretched, then jerked back as if pulled. The boundary did not like him when it was fully awake. Marek's eyes flashed with anger. He lunged one more step, trying to press the counterfeit thread to the stone. Arendor moved at last, not with violence, but with speed. He stepped between Marek and the boundary stone and lifted his palm, and the forest wind shifted as if obeying him. The counterfeit thread fluttered away from Marek's fingers like a leaf caught in a sudden gust. Marek stared at his empty hand, then at me, breath tight. "You think you have won," he said. "You have. Only delayed the inevitable. The lowlands will come with more than couriers next time." I kept singing until the last trace of the carved symbol faded into plain moss. Then I let the final note fall into silence. The forest held its breath. The seam in the air was gone. The boundary hum steadied, deep and satisfied, like a door newly barred from the inside. I exhaled, trembling now that the song had ended. Arendor turned his head slightly, eyes still on Marek. "Leave," he said quietly. Marek's polite mask tried to return, but it did not fit anymore. He backed away, slow, careful, as if measuring the forest for weaknesses. As he retreated into shadow, he glanced at me one last time. "This village will blame you when trouble arrives," he said softly. "They always blame the key." Then he vanished into the trees, his steps silent, his presence thinning like mist. I stood by the oldest boundary. Stone, lantern still glowing, heart pounding. Arendor stepped closer, voice gentle. "You did well." I looked down at my hands. They shook. He waited, as if giving me space to find my own words. "What happens now?" I asked. Arendor's gaze shifted to the dark forest where Marek had disappeared. "Now," he said, "he will try a different door, and we must make sure the village does not open it for him." On the way back, the forest felt different, not calmer, not safer. Different in the way a room feels after someone has spoken a truth no one can unhear. The boundary hum had steadied, but it carried a new tension, like a tightened string that could sing beautifully or snap, depending on who plucked it. The heart-glass lantern glowed softly in my arms, no longer flaring with alarm, yet not fully at rest. Its light seemed to pulse in time with the bond hum in my chest, as if it knew the night was not finished. Arendor walked beside me now, still not touching, but close enough that I could feel his presence anchor the air around my shoulders. We said little. Words are poor companions after you have watched a mask slip. When the first village lanterns came into view, warm and golden between tree trunks, my stomach tightened again. Part of me wanted to step back into the forest and keep walking until sunrise, until the village was just a story behind me. But I was the ward singer. Running would not spare anyone. It would only leave the door unguarded. At the edge of the lantern line, the elders waited where I had ordered them to stand. Their faces looked pale in the glow, their eyes bright with questions. Elder Valor stepped forward the moment he saw me, relief and outrage wrestling across his expression. Behind him, Marek was gone. That absence was loud. "Where is the courier, Elder?" Valor demanded. I held the lantern steady and met his gaze. "Not a courier," I said. "He came to use my song to open the boundary." A ripple moved through the gathered villagers. Someone gasped. Someone laughed nervously, as if the statement was too absurd to be real. Elder Valor's face hardened. "You are claiming the lowland representative lied," he said. "That is a serious accusation." Of course it was serious. Elder Valor loved seriousness when it made him feel important. I pointed toward the forest. "He carved a lure on the oldest boundary stone," I said. "He was waiting for me to sing the festival cadence so the seam would follow his mark." The elders exchanged glances. Some looked skeptical, Some looked afraid. One elder, quiet old Sarah, stared at the lantern as if seeing it for the first time. Elder Valor lifted his chin. "And you stopped him," he said. "How?" I hesitated, not because I wanted to hide the truth, but because I could already taste how he would use it. If I said I sang the older version, he would accuse me of breaking tradition. If I said the heart glass warned me, he would accuse me of superstition. If I said Arendor helped, he would accuse me of inviting outside influence. And if I said bond, the village would hear scandal before it heard strategy. Arendor spoke before I could. "The boundary was strained," he said. "She sang to seal it properly. That is all." Elder Valor's eyes flashed. "And you are who to speak for our rituals." Arendor's gaze did not waver. "Someone who knows what a lure mark is," he said. "Someone who recognizes a counterfeit ward thread when he sees it." At that, a few villagers went still. The phrase counterfeit ward thread landed like a weight. It was too specific to be invented. Old Sarah stepped forward, voice trembling but firm. "Did you see proof?" she asked me. I nodded slowly. "There was a mark on the stone," I said. "It is faded now, but the heart glass reacted to it. It showed the seam. It warned me." Elder Valor scoffed. "Lanterns do not warn. They obey." My frustration flared. "Lanterns obey intent," I snapped. And my intent was protection, not compliance. The word compliance seemed to ignite something. People began murmuring again, remembering Merrick's speech, his parchment, the threats implied by inspections. Elder Valor raised his staff for silence. "We must be careful," he said, voice booming. "If the lowlands are sending representatives, we cannot afford to anger them. We must remain cooperative." Cooperative. The same word, now wearing Elder Valor's mouth. I stared at him, stunned by the speed of it. Merrick had barely left the forest, and already his language had rooted in our leader's tongue. That was Merrick's real talent, not slipping through wards, slipping through minds. Arendor's voice was low, controlled. "Cooperation is not the same as surrender," he said. Elder Valor turned on him. "And surrender is not the same as honoring authority." Authority. Another hook. I realized then that Marek did not need to be present to keep pulling strings. The parchment seal, the idea of inspections, the fear of consequences had already done the work. The village was prepared to blame me for any trouble, to hand over the lantern, to hand over me, if it meant they could return to believing safety was something you earned by obeying the right people. My chest tightened. The bond hum steadied me again, and with it came a quiet clarity. I had been the key for years without knowing it. Tonight, I had chosen to know. I stepped forward, lifting the heart glass lantern higher, so its pale light touched the faces nearest me. The villagers fell quiet, drawn to it like moths. "Listen," I said, voice firm. "Merrick will return. Not as Merrick, not with the same face. He will come as whatever you trust most. A messenger, a healer, a cousin from the lowlands, perhaps even someone you have known for years." A shiver moved through the crowd. Old Sarah's eyes widened. "Borrowed faces," she whispered, as if she had heard the concept in an old tale and prayed it was not real. "Yes," I said. "Borrowed roles." Elder Valor scoffed again, but his confidence had thinned. He did not like stories that made him feel small. I continued. "If anyone asks to see the lantern, you refuse," I said. "If anyone demands the ritual be witnessed beyond the lantern line, you refuse. If anyone tells you I have endangered you, you remember who tried to turn the boundary into a door." A murmur, uncertain but thoughtful, ran through the villagers. Fear and pride tangled, but something else sparked too. Trust, not in the council. In the one thing the village had depended on without fully understanding. My song. Elder Valor's voice was sharp. "You cannot give orders to the village." I met his gaze without flinching. "I can if the orders keep the boundary intact," I replied. Tonight, the boundary listened to me, not to parchment. The words hung in the air like a challenge. For a moment, I thought Elder Valor would lash out with authority and pride. But then old Sarah stepped beside me and placed her hand lightly on my sleeve. "Let her speak," Sarah said. "She has always kept us safe." Others nodded slowly. Not everyone, but enough. Elder Valor's jaw tightened. "Fine," he said. "We will discuss this at dawn." He turned away, staff tapping sharply on the stones, already retreating into politics and committees, into the comfort of pretending. Control still belonged to him. The villagers drifted back toward the square, quieter now, lantern light reflecting in unsettled eyes. Children were led indoors, doors closed with less laughter than before. Soon, only Arendor and I remained at the edge of the forest, the heart glass lantern still in my arms. The bond hum in my chest felt steadier than it had all night, but also heavier, because now it carried a truth I could not ignore. If Merrick wanted access, he would keep coming, and every time he came, the village would be tested, not by force, but by fear and convenience. I turned to Arendor. "You said he will try a different door," I whispered. "What door?" Arendor's gaze lifted to the dark line of trees beyond the village lights. "There are other anchors," he said. "Smaller stones, old paths, forgotten thresholds. Briar Hollow is not protected by one lantern alone. It is protected by a network your council barely remembers exists." My stomach dropped. "That means he does not need me." Arendor's expression softened. "He still wants you," he said, "because you are the fastest way, the cleanest key." I swallowed. The word key had never felt so heavy. Then I asked the question that had been pressing against my ribs since the moment Arendor first spoke of a bond. "What do you want from me, truly?" I said. "Not for one night, not for a ritual." Arendor inhaled slowly, as if choosing honesty over strategy. "I want you to live without being used," he said, "and I want to finish what your line began. The set is waking. Thresholds are shifting. Ward singers will be hunted, pressured, bribed, blamed. You will not be the last." His eyes held mine, and in them was a quiet intensity that scared me more than charm ever could. "If you stay here alone," he continued, "they will turn you into a tool, either for the council or for the lowlands, or for the next man who arrives with a seal and a smile. If you come with me, you will learn the full song. You will learn the network. You will become more than a key." The village lights flickered in the distance, soft and familiar. My home, my people, my duty. And yet, a strange grief rose in me, because I realized how little the village had ever truly seen me. They saw a singer, a ritual, a guarantee, not a person with a life that belonged to her. A cold wind brushed through the lane, and for a heartbeat, the heart-glass lantern dimmed. Not fear this time, sorrow. I looked down at it, and in its pale depths, I saw a faint image, not clear enough to be a vision, but enough to chill me. A lantern line, a crowd, a familiar face among them, smiling politely. Not Marek's face, someone else's. The boundary hum trembled. Arendor's voice tightened. "He is already moving," he said. My throat went dry. "Dawn meeting," I whispered, thinking of Elder Valor's words. "Yes," Arendor said. "Marek will not wait for night again. He will use daylight. He will use the council. He will use fear dressed as reason." I lifted my gaze to the village, to the council hall, where Elder Valor would gather everyone and decide what to do with the problem of me. I felt the bond hum steady and strong. 2 notes, 2 choices, not simply heart or life, home or freedom, staying to protect a village that might hand me over, or leaving to become someone who could protect more than one place. I closed my eyes and breathed in lantern smoke and pine, letting the truth settle. When I opened them, I spoke quietly. "At dawn, he will come wearing a trusted face," I said, "and if he succeeds, the village will give him what he wants." Arendor watched me, waiting. I tightened my grip on the heart-glass lantern. "Then we do not let dawn be his stage," I said, and in that moment, I made my decision. Dawn came pale and sharp, like a blade made of light. Briar Hollow woke early, not with the usual slow comfort of chores and breakfast smoke, but with an anxious energy that ran from door to door. Word had traveled. The ritual had not been witnessed. The lantern had flared. A stranger had been confronted in the forest. People filled the square as if gathering could turn uncertainty into safety. Elder Valor called the meeting beside the council hall, where the stone steps made a natural stage. He stood taller than usual, staff planted like a claim. The other elders formed a line behind him, faces drawn, tired, proud. I arrived carrying the heart-glass lantern unlit, willow cradle tucked against my ribs. The lantern felt warm anyway, as if it remembered last. Night's ceiling. Arendor walked a few paces behind me, visible this time, not hiding, not sneaking. That choice mattered. If Marek planned to use daylight, we would use daylight too. The square quieted as I stepped forward. Elder Valor lifted his staff. "We will hear all accounts," he announced. "Then we will decide how to respond to the lowlands. Respond, not protect. Comply, not stand." That was the shape of his fear. A few villagers glanced toward the road, as if expecting more strangers to arrive at any moment. Then someone did. A figure walked into the square from the east road at an unhurried pace, dressed simply, carrying a satchel and a parchment case. People shifted, murmuring. Some looked relieved, as if the sight of official-looking objects soothed them. He did not have Marek's face. He wore the face of a man many villagers recognized. Tomas, the trader who had brought salt and cloth to Briar Hollow for years. My stomach dropped, cold and immediate. A few people called his name. Thomas raised a hand in greeting, smiling in a familiar way, the easy smile of someone who belongs. But I felt the boundary hum hesitate around him, the same hesitation it had shown around Marek. Borrowed role, borrowed face. Arendor's voice came low, only for me. There. He chose someone they trust. Tomas stepped up to Elder Valor and offered a respectful nod. "Elder," he said, voice warm, ordinary. "I came as soon as I heard there was trouble." The villagers murmured again, relief spreading like spilled water. Elder Valor's shoulders relaxed. "Tomas is a friend of Briar Hollow. he told the crowd, as if that alone proved safety. Thomas turned his attention to me and softened his expression, concerned and gentle. Lyra, he said, using the familiar shortened name. People are worried. The lowlands are worried. I am worried. Let us clear this misunderstanding before it grows teeth. I felt anger flare, because he spoke like a man offering help, and he did it perfectly. No violence, no threats, just reason dressed as friendship. Elder Valor nodded eagerly. Yes, we must avoid conflict with the lowlands. Tomas lifted the parchment case. I bring guidance, he said. A request, not a demand. The lowlands ask to inspect the lantern and verify the ritual remains stable. It will reassure everyone. He glanced at me, eyes kind. It will protect you from blame, Lyra. If you cooperate, no one can accuse you of secrecy. There it was again. The hook. Protect you from blame. It was designed to make me hand over the lantern willingly, believing it would save me. The villagers leaned in. Some nodded. Some whispered that it sounded reasonable. Elder Valor looked relieved, as if someone had finally offered him a way to keep his authority and his peace. Arendor took a step forward, calm and steady. Inspection by whom? He asked. Tomas smiled, still warm. By appointed witnesses, by those tasked with maintaining order. Arendor's gaze did not shift. Names, he said. Thomas's smile tightened slightly. Names can be provided. Papers can be stamped. You know how it works. That sentence was wrong in Tomas's mouth. Thomas had always complained about paperwork. Tomas had always joked that seals were for people who did not trust their own eyes. I saw a villager beside the well frown, as if that mismatch tugged at a memory. Good, I thought. A crack. I stepped forward and lifted the heart glass lantern higher. Unlit, but present. Willow cradle catching dawn light. You say this will protect me from blame, I said to Thomas, but you also say it will reassure the lowlands. Which is it? Thomas's eyes softened further. Patient. Both. Cooperation benefits everyone. Elder Valor nodded eagerly. Yes, we must think of everyone. I held my ground. The lantern is not an object for trade, I said. It is tied to the boundary. It is tied to me. Thomas lowered his voice, intimate, as if speaking to a friend. Lyra, please, do not make this harder. You do not want the village to suffer because you refused a simple request. I felt the crowd shift, emotion rising, fear, impatience, the desire to return to normal. A few villagers looked at me with pleading eyes. That was Merrick's real weapon, not force, community pressure. Arendor's voice came quietly, carrying just enough to reach the front row. She will not be coerced, he said. Elder Valor's face reddened. This is not coercion. This is governance. Tomas's smile stayed pleasant. No one is forcing anyone, he said. We are simply asking. Simply asking. I stared at him and felt the boundary hum tremble again. I remembered my grandmother's vellum line. The heart glass reflects intent. So I decided to use it not as a shield, but as a mirror. I set the lantern on the stone step in front of me and placed both palms on the willow cradle. I looked at the crowd. If you want reassurance, I said, then we will do this openly. Not with papers, not with seals, with truth. Elder Valor's eyes narrowed. What are you doing? I did not answer him. I lifted my gaze to Tomas. If you are truly Tomas, I said, then the heart glass will recognize your intent and remain calm. If you are not, it will show us. Tomas's smile flickered. That is superstition, he said lightly. Then you have nothing to fear, I replied. Silence fell. The villagers watched the lantern as if it might speak. Even Elder Valor hesitated. He did not like losing control, but he liked public humiliation even less. If he objected now, it would look like he feared the answer. Tomas gave a small laugh, the exact kind of laugh that says you are being unreasonable. Fine, he said. Let us end this theatrics. He stepped closer to the lantern, and the boundary hum hesitated around him. Again, unmistakable. I began to sing, not loudly, not the festival song, a simple tone, steady, grounded, designed to wake the heart glass just enough to reflect what stands before it. The lantern's crystal core caught the sound and brightened, pale light blooming within the willow. The crowd drew in a collective breath. Tomas's expression tightened, but he forced his smile back. See, he said, calm, reassuring. Then the heart glass shifted. In the crystal's pale depth, a shadow moved wrong. Not a monstrous shape, not a horror, just a misalignment, like a face overlaying another face and failing to match the eyes. A murmur rose from the villagers. A few stepped back instinctively, not because they saw a demon, but because they recognized a lie. Thomas's smile finally cracked. I kept singing, voice steady. The heart glass light sharpened, and for a heartbeat, the familiar trader's face seemed to blur at the edges, as if the dawn air refused to hold it. Old Sarah whispered, borrowed. A villager near the fountain crossed themselves. With the old gesture, Elder Valor stared, mouth open, the staff in his hand suddenly looking like a child's toy. Tomas's voice turned colder. though he tried to keep it pleasant. "Stop, Lyra," he said. "You are making them afraid for no reason." I ended the note abruptly. The lantern's light remained bright, as if it had decided it would not be soothed. Then I spoke clearly to the crowd. "This is what he does," I said. "He comes as what you trust. He uses your fear of blame to turn you into his hands." Tomas took a step back, eyes narrowing. "You think this proves anything?" he said, voice no longer friendly. "People see what they want to see." Arendor stepped forward, calm as moonlight. "You can leave now," he said. "The boundary has recognized you." For a heartbeat, the square felt like it balanced on a pin. Then Thomas's posture shifted, not violent, not frantic, just subtly wrong, as if he stopped, pretending to be a man with a job, and became what he truly was. His gaze swept the crowd, measuring, not hatred, calculation. "So be it," he said softly. "If you will not open the door willingly, you will open it under pressure eventually. The lowlands always get what they want." He turned toward the road, stepping away, and something unexpected happened. A young woman near the baker's stall, someone I barely knew by name, stepped forward and lifted her chin. "No," she said. Her voice was small but firm. Another villager joined her, then another. "No," they echoed. Not shouted, not dramatic, just a line of ordinary people choosing not to be guided by fear. Tomas paused and looked back, and for the first time, something like frustration crossed his face. Not because he was losing an argument, because his method was failing. He had counted on isolation, on blame, on making me the key that everyone resented. But now the village was seeing me as a person, and seeing him as a lie. Tomas's smile returned, thin and sharp. "Enjoy your courage," he said. "The world is changing. Your lantern light is small compared to what is coming." Then he walked away down the road, and as he did, his familiar face seemed to settle again, as if the role chose to hold until he was out of sight. The square remained silent for a long moment after he left. Elder Valor finally spoke, voice unsteady. "We should have listened," he said, but the admission sounded painful, like swallowing thorns. Old Sarah stepped beside me and placed her hand on my arm. "You did right," she said. The young woman near the stall nodded. "We believe you." Something in my chest loosened, and to my surprise, tears burned behind my eyes. Not because I had been afraid, because I had been alone, and now I was not. The heart glass lantern dimmed, gently, as if satisfied. I lifted it again and looked at the village. "The lowlands will return," I said. "Perhaps not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but they will. And when they do, you must remember this feeling. Not fear, not compliance, clarity." Elder Valor nodded slowly, humbled. "We will rebuild the council's wards," he said. "We will restore the network you spoke of." Arendor's gaze flicked to me, quiet approval. The meeting dispersed. People returned to their homes, but the way they moved had changed. They were not pretending brightness was a shield anymore. They were choosing it as a statement. When the square finally emptied, I stood at the fountain with the lantern in my hands and let the morning sun touch my face. Arendor approached, stopping a respectful distance away. "You saved them," he said. I shook my head. "I did not save them alone. They chose to see. That is what saved them." Arendor's expression softened. "And what will you choose now?" My throat tightened. The question carried everything. Home, duty, freedom, heart. I looked around the village, at the familiar roofs, the familiar paths, the boundary stones that had held for generations, because singers had kept them steady. Then I looked at Arendor, at the quiet promise in his eyes. Not possession, not pressure, a path. I thought of Merrick's parting words. The lowlands always get what they want, not if we stop handing it to them, I thought. I lifted my chin. "I will not leave Briar Hollow unguarded," I said. "Not while it learns to stand without turning me into a tool." Arendor waited, still not pushing. "But I will not stay small," I continued. "I will learn the full song. I will learn the network. I will learn every threshold Merrick thinks he can trick." I stepped closer, just one step, and felt the bond hum, respond softly, like a chord remembering itself. "If you will teach me," I said, "then walk with me, not to claim me, not to bind me forever, to walk beside me." Arendor's breath released, as if he had been holding it since the day he arrived. "I will," he said. The sun climbed higher. The village began to sound like itself again, but not the old itself that hid behind tradition, a new itself that knew the cost of trust. I carried the heart glass lantern back toward my cottage, and Arendor walked with me, and for the first time since the strangers arrived, I felt something unfamiliar. Not fear, hope, because one stranger had wanted my heart as a key, one had wanted my life as a door, and I had chosen something neither of them expected. My own will.